Can I go with what I've got in my version, or do you want to point out where the changes are?
No, I think that'll be fine.
Okay, I'm working with a hard copy. So, did you make many changes?
No.
Okay.
Hi everyone, this is Anthony Hale from Grensbach Gleer & Associates. I'm the Interactive Marketing Specialist here. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention a few technical things. To submit a question, hover over the green bar at the top center of your screen until you see a question mark or a conversation bubble, and be sure to send the question to the host, which is right now is Catherine Julitz. Any questions that we aren't able to get to during the session will be answered as part of the follow-up transcript that we will email out to all registrants. Following the webinar, we'll send out a link to a recording of today's session, along with the PowerPoint slides and written responses to any questions we don't get to during the session. If at any point during the webinar that you are experiencing technical difficulties, please email me at ahoell@grensgleer.com or call WebEx directly at 866-229-3239. That's 866-229-3239. And if there aren't any initial questions, I would like to introduce everyone to Deborah Scriba, Vice President here at GG&A, and Joe Sandman, Vice President at GG&A.
Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony.
Hi, this is Deborah Scriba.
Hi, and this is Joe Sandman. And Deborah and I would like to wish everyone a good afternoon, or I guess it's good morning to folks who are calling in from the West Coast. We want to welcome each of you to this GG&A webinar on stewardship. And the fact that so many of you are participating today reflects two things. It certainly reflects the growing importance of stewardship in increasing gift support, an importance that more and more people are aware of. But it also represents your commitment to do the best job you can do in this important area at your institution. So we're very pleased to be able to share our experience and insights, and also that of our firm, Grensbach Gleer & Associates. I'd like to make one comment before we take a look at the agenda. When Deborah and I were shaping the content for this, we decided to include as much helpful information as we could possibly put into a one-hour presentation, because we wanted you to have as many ideas as possible to draw from. This could appear a little bit overwhelming. We realize that you represent a broad spectrum of not-for-profit organizations, including healthcare, social services, art institutions, education, and others. So you're representing a broad spectrum of institutions, and we want you, as we go through this information, to keep your antennae up and think about which of those apply to your institution. So please don't be overwhelmed by the volume of ideas that we're sharing. As I said, we wanted to get as much helpful information out as possible. But Deborah and I trust you, knowing your institution, that as we go through this webinar and as you see the points we're making, you'll know which of these seem to fit with your institution, not only because of the particular character of your not-for-profit organization, but also because of the resources that you have. You'll know whether some things we're talking about make sense for you or not. So with that, let's take a look at the agenda. After a brief introduction, we're going to cover the objectives and benefits of stewardship. We're going to look at stewardship plans and activities. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the responsibilities of the staff. We're going to share some principles and best practices. And finally, talk about how you can measure the effectiveness of your stewardship program. And we're going to be certain to leave some time for your questions at the end. So we can begin our little introduction by looking at trends in stewardship. What are the current developments in the field? Well, stewardship today is increasingly comprehensive, involves a lot of moving parts. It's increasingly customized, not only to your individual institution, but but also to your individual donors. One big trend is that stewardship is now not seen as something separate from cultivation. It's seen as critical to future cultivation. In fact, we believe it's one of the very best tools that you have at your disposal to cultivate your best prospects. Another trend is people expect a high level of quality in stewardship. Stewardship is increasingly interdepartmental. It's increasingly being done by a team. No director of stewardship or director of donor relations or even an associate vice president for development can run a stewardship program. He or she needs a team of people that will represent offices and initiatives throughout your institution and key stakeholders throughout your institution. And finally, a very important trend, and it's one that Deborah and I want to emphasize, is that increasingly a solid stewardship program is seen as a very important component to establishing at your institution a culture of philanthropy. And all of us know how important it is to have this culture of philanthropy that permeates the institution, particularly among its leaders. Okay, strategic stewardship programs. What can we say? What are the basic things that strategic stewardship programs do? Well, first of all, they build an organized program with staff, resources, and an institutional commitment. Deborah and I are always blown away by how many organizations will say, yes, we're doing stewardship. Some of them even have a stewardship plan, but they haven't taken time to ask themselves what kind of resources are necessary, personnel, staff resources, also budgetary resources to do the things that we want to do. And sometimes they'll try to initiate stewardship without making sure that the institutional commitment is in place. All that needs to be done up front. Strategic stewardship programs will build a framework for your discussions with donors. In other words, stewardship doesn't operate in a vacuum. It always looks towards the future. And as you are shaping your stewardship plans and as you're taking your specific stewardship steps, you should always keep your eye on, well, what's the next gift that this individual might have the capacity to give to our institution? Here you'll see building a culture of philanthropy, which we talked about, and this interdepartmental team approach where so many people in the organization are working on it together is key to that, because you can't be involved in this thing without realizing how important stewardship is to your organization.
And Joe, it's not just development and division chiefs. It's everyone who participates in the donor experience. At hospitals, it's valets. At museums, it's guards. It's staff in the cafeteria, and so on. Everybody really needs to play a role today.
Absolutely right, Deborah. Another thing to think about stewardship is that it's not a casual, kind of a willy-nilly or spontaneous process. It's got to be formalized. It's not a nice to do. It's something that needs to be organized, quantified, and qualified. One vice president who was a client of ours just told me last month that he needed a solid written stewardship plan to remind him of the strokes that he needed to take. He said, too often I'll come in and I'll forget the birthday of one of our best donors, or I'll forget the wedding anniversary date of one of our best donors. But then he followed it up and saying, but I'm not the only one who needs it. Our major gift directors need it. Our director of stewardship needs it. So having a formal plan is critical to making this thing work.
Thanks, Joe. Turning to objectives of effective donor stewardship programs, the first important objective is to fulfill obligations. So you want to ensure that all specific obligations that are part of the gift agreement are fulfilled. And in order to do that, for major and principal gifts, make sure that all of the obligations are recorded in the gift agreement and that a copy of the gift agreement is immediately sent to the stewardship office. The next objective is to describe use and impact. And of course, you have to distinguish between the two. How is the gift being used and what impact does it have? and then periodically demonstrate to donors the significant positive impact of their gifts on the institution and the fulfillment of its mission to benefit society.
And remember that your organization is totally unique. It has a unique mission, and it enriches people. It touches people's lives in unique ways. So when you shape your stewardship strokes, take advantage of that uniqueness to describe the impact that a donor has. For example, let's say you're working at an art museum and one of your donors named a museum gallery. Well, send her photos of groups of students who come into that gallery and are enthralled by the work of art that she made possible, or pictures of a docent giving a presentation to a group of fascinating adults. Basically, you have to realize that your institution and the gifts that they make is having an impact on people, and you want to demonstrate that, show the impact on real human beings, or on a particular neighborhood, or a particular city, or a particular state.
Thanks, Joe. So going on, stewardship programs help you cultivate your donors for increased support, especially those who are most critical to your organization's future. And so if you're making stewardship a part of cultivation, that means that those who are responsible for stewardship have to know what the cultivation strategy is for each donor. At your institution, does stewardship participate in your regularly scheduled donor strategy meetings? If not, you might want to have a conversation about that. You appreciate your donors, so let them know. Make sure your donors feel that your organization, its leaders, and the particular beneficiaries of their generosity are sincerely grateful for their support. So make sure that the scholarship recipient knows about the donor who has funded her scholarship and that she has the opportunity to say thanks. And keep in mind that every gift is special to every donor. Stewardship deepens engagement. You will strengthen relationships between the donor and the institution through stewardship. You can provide your donors with special opportunities for engagement, especially to give your organization's key leaders input and counsel. And you can provide opportunities for your donor to be meaningfully engaged in the achievement of your organization's goals. With a good stewardship program, you can broaden points of contact. For example, no donor should have only one point of contact. Museum donors know that not only their major gifts officer, but also curators and other staff are important to stewardship. If your donor is interested in conservation, don't forget the conservators. You're helping to develop your institution's culture of philanthropy.
Deborah, that's a great point. And here's an example of doing exactly what Deborah said, to broaden the donors' contacts with the institution so they don't have just one point of contact. They have important contacts. There was a university in the Midwest that had a very successful business leader. He was an alumnus. He had made $1 million gifts, and he loved the basketball program, but he was always traveling internationally and was never to attend any basketball games. He followed it. He followed online, followed in the newspapers. So a wonderful stewardship stroke that took place and really was key to him making a much bigger gift to name a building, a student center at this university. The stroke was when he came back to spend a day with the president, the major gift director responsible took him over to the basketball practice. And, of course, the major gift director had prepared the basketball coach. And the basketball coach saw him walk in, and he blew the whistle, and he stopped the practice, and he walked over to this gentleman and introduced him to the players as one of our most successful alumni, who was from Toledo, Ohio, and he started at the bottom and he moved up. And then we'd like to ask, sir, if you would share with our young men some of the keys to your success, because every one of them wants to be successful, and they can learn a tremendous amount from you. Well, you can imagine what this guy did. He was just in seventh heaven sharing his success stories with the players, and that was an example of really establishing an engagement, a deep engagement with somebody important at the institution.
Thanks, Joe. That's a great story. So, like your donor that you just described, most donors want recognition. and with good stewardship, you can provide it. So publicly recognize your donors, both individuals and groups, for their generosity and for the impact of their gifts. And of course, always respect the anonymity of those who prefer it. Lastly, you can offer access through good stewardship. You can enable your donors to realize that they're insiders in your institution, having special access to breaking news, to your organization's various leaders, and to special events and celebrations. But be careful here. Be sure not to promise more access than you can deliver. Open-ended questions such as, who would you like to meet, can really get you in trouble. Now let's look at the benefits of strategic donor stewardship. With strategic donor stewardship, you provide personalized and philanthropy-based cultivation to your best donors, many of whom you are not able to visit as frequently as their generosity warrants. With good stewardship, you can develop a solid foundation for soliciting increased annual gifts and/or additional gifts to specific projects donors have supported. Just last week, I was speaking to a donor of one of our museum clients, and she was talking about a particularly memorable moment. The museum was trying to close funding for an exhibition. They needed completion funding, and this donor stepped up and gave them what they needed. And so when it came time to install the exhibit, the museum called her and said, would you like to come to the installation, and would you like to bring your daughter? And so she did, and she was telling me how memorable it was for both of them. We were talking about her possible contribution to the next campaign, and she said, boy, count me in. I know I'm going to really want to give to them. I just feel so close to them right now. So also with strategic stewardship, you can provide the best possible foundation for soliciting multi-year commitments to your organization's next comprehensive campaign. So for everyone who is in a stewardship office right now, make sure that you are really mindful of the needs and priorities of your institution during their upcoming comprehensive campaign. So continuing with benefits, one of the benefits of doing this very well and doing this strategically is that even in the stewardship phase, you can encourage donors at all levels to stretch to higher levels of gift support. They see other donors doing more, and they want to do the same. You engage your organization's leaders and constituents in the process of cultivating major gifts prospects. But think about how you involve, or don't involve at the moment, volunteers and donors. You can use stewardship to broaden your spectrum. You can certainly expand the potential of your donors to make significant planned gifts. And one thing that I particularly like about the stewardship process is that you can create opportunities to cultivate the next generation in the donor's family. Often, in fact, go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead. Please.
Often, one more point, often the stewardship of the next generation is even more important than your organization's young societies, like young professionals. And the reason it's more important is that it's more direct and personal. So it's really sticking within a family and making gifts to your institution a family tradition.
Deborah, that's an excellent point. I think the point Deborah made a second ago about stewarding the next generation is critically important, especially for your largest donors. And here's an example that was very powerful. There was a president of the university, had been president for over 20 years. He was beloved, and now it was time for him to retire. And what he wanted to do is to have a very special individual dinner for the couples that were his biggest donors. And he had a very impressive office with the university seal on the rug. He would occasionally host dinners or lunches there. So he scheduled a series of individual dinners at his office, just beautiful dinners. And a couple months before the first one, someone had the idea, well, we ought to invite the kids of the major donors. It would be meaningful to the parents to have them there. It would be meaningful for their children. And boy, was it. The parents, it meant so much to them to have their kids hear the president go on and on about how generous they were and how wonderful they were to the institution. The kids had never experienced any kind of cultivation like that. And you can be sure that they got the message that, gosh, you know, this is something we can continue. And in fact, many of those second-generation people who attended those dinners, who were not alumni of the institution, wound up continuing the generosity of their parents during the next campaign. So again, Deborah, I think the point you made about not forgetting about the next generation, particularly with our largest donors, is a great point. Okay, we talked about stewardship plans. Well, what is a stewardship plan, and what should it involve? Well, a comprehensive, clearly written stewardship plan is necessary because you have to list the different benefits donors in each category will receive. You also have to list the timetables when they're going to get them and who's responsible for that. So it's a master grid of all those activities that, as Deborah said earlier, everyone who's involved in the stewardship process sees this.
Joe, one additional note. Please make sure that everybody involved in the cultivation of donors has a copy of this plan. It's not just something that the folks in stewardship work with.
That's a great idea because you want them to know what's going on, right?
Right.
Excellent. One way, well, I shouldn't say one way, this is a key ingredient of a solid stewardship plan, is to have a matrix. You've seen matrices where down on the left side, or you can see it here, you can see the different levels of gifts, and then across the top, the different stewardship strokes that they receive. And this matrix will help you make sure that those stewardship strokes are in fact delivered.
So in the personalized plan, I always like to get down to the real details. For example, if a donor expects a visit from the CEO, make sure that you have it in the plan.
And you also want to make sure that you've got different options to choose from. We mentioned this earlier, so that the individual who is tasked with the job of creating a stewardship plan for someone who just gave your institution $10 million doesn't have to start with a blank sheet of paper, doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. They have a number of options that they can choose from, all of which have been pre-approved by the vice president or whomever for people at different levels. It just makes the process move much more quickly and much more effectively. Other characteristics of a solid stewardship plan is to always remember that you should be focusing on primarily on two groups. You know you have limited resources, so focus those limited resources on the group that has made the biggest gifts to your institution, but also the group that has the potential of making the biggest gift to your institution. You want to be sure that you come up with a plan for how to address underwater funds. Deborah, you want to explain that? You're better at that than I am, I'll tell you.
Well, that's, of course, when a fund loses value, so this is a delicate issue. One thing that you really want to do is to be completely transparent, but you also want to contact the donor as soon as possible and explore possibilities for addressing the loss of value. Joe, do you want to continue with that?
No, I think that's an excellent point. We have to just make sure that we are communicating with them. And there are ways, Deborah, as you know, that some institutions will respond. For example, I've seen institutions say, well, gosh, this is one of our biggest donors. We can supplement with institutional funds his gifts to bring that fund up to the level that he put it at until the stock market comes back. And boy, did that donor appreciate that. And there's also the possibility of going back to the donor and asking if he would want to make some additional support. You want to make sure that your stewardship plan is basically command central. It's a central system that monitors and supports all these different contacts inside the institution.
And a central system really helps monitor and steward multiple interests. For example, at a hospital, a single donor might be interested simultaneously in cardiology and pediatrics. So be careful not to pigeonhole. You
want to make sure that your stewardship plan ensures, again, that the stewardship is aligned with donor cultivation. And a written plan will help you do that. You'll look down the column and you'll see what you're doing for someone, and you'll say, gosh, that doesn't fit with what our plans are for this person in the future. Maybe too much, maybe too little. A stewardship plan gives you a structure that ensures reports and benefits. And this is where the matrix helps. The plan also gives you an opportunity to personalize and customized stewardship. And Deborah gave already a couple examples of personalized stewardship. This is critically important because at the very highest levels, you want to be able to do something special for the individual. And I'll give you just one example. There was an institution in the East Coast that had a very generous donor who was also a trustee and got to be at retirement age, left the board, and then had some medical problems that kept him from getting back to campus as often as he would like. Well, he made a multi-million-dollar gift to refurbish the front of the campus, and in particular to build a beautiful opening gate, just a beautiful gate with the name of the institution on it. So the stewardship stroke was not only to name the gate after him, but every year there was a huge alumni event where alumni and their families came back to campus and did a myriad of activities over a Saturday. And one of those activities was a 10K race. So the stewardship stroke that was done was that the 10K race was named after this individual. It's been going on for 10 years, and the individual is invited back every year to shoot off the pistol to start the race and to give the trophies out at the end of the race. And I know for a fact that even though the individual passed away last year after doing this for 10 years, his widow and his kids now keep that going. So that's one example of a totally unique type of stewardship stroke. Your plan is also going to keep you from overspending. We talked about your limited resources. By seeing it all in one place and knowing what your budget is, you're going to know what you can afford and which of these strokes are the most important. This plan will also document the policies and procedures that you'll be following in stewardship.
And so all of the gift officers, of course, should have copies of these these policies and procedures. And hopefully you can make this a part of a major gifts officer's new employee orientation.
Great idea. And also don't forget that once a large gift is secured, at that time, right around the time that you do the acknowledgement letter, that's when the person who secured the gift is responsible for writing a customized written stewardship plan for each major donor, which is shared not only with the stewardship team, but certainly with his or her supervisor. Okay, what about reviewing the stewardship plan? Well, first, don't look at it as a static document. If it sits on the shelf with dust on it, it's not working. It's got to be a dynamic document that you're looking at all the time, and it's got to be one that you review periodically. We recommend an annual review where you get the stewardship team together and go through the plan. So what are you looking at? Well, you're kind of reviewing your institution's philosophy of stewardship. You're confirming the agreement of everybody around the table of how important this is. And again, you're making sure that your stewardship activities are linked to a fundraising strategy for each donor. I knew a stewardship plan that didn't make any changes after the campaign was over. It was all geared up towards securing new gifts, and then the stewardship activities didn't change. Well, after the one campaign ended and another campaign had begun, it was obviously time to make some changes in the stewardship plan. Deborah and I also recommend that standing meetings take place, perhaps once a quarter, of the stewardship officers across the institution to share best practices. That keeps everybody informed and on the same page. And if you work at a smaller scale institution, make sure that everyone in the major gift and principal gift program, and that could include presidents and deans, that they have a copy of this so that they know what's going on, that they know who the top prospects are, and what stewardship strokes they are receiving from your institution. Okay, let's get really concrete now. Let's actually talk about the activities. And of course, you know what the first stewardship activity is. It's to acknowledge the gift in a way that makes the benefactor feel good about the gift they just made. So personalized acknowledgement letters from your organization's leaders. Of course, the more personal would go to the bigger gift are very important. But also be creative and think about the beneficiaries of the donor's generosity. For example, if a donor establishes a chair, why not have an acknowledgement letter besides coming from the president, come from the dean or from the department head? And let's say that your donor has established a clinical care room at a hospital, at your hospital. Well, why not get personal letters from a couple of the doctors who are using those clinical rooms and can report back to the benefactor about how there's such better rooms than they're used to working with, and as a result, they can give much better care to the patients. The number and level of professionalism, of acknowledgments, of course, will depend on the size of gift. We mentioned that. And we also talked a little bit about an unexpected letter of thanks. They expect to hear from the president, but why not a trustee or an officer or a faculty member or a student showing their appreciation to the donor?
Joe, I found that asking donors to thank other donors is great, too. And I especially like it when an old donor thanks a new donor. It's really bringing somebody into your institution's community.
That's a terrific stroke. It builds the culture of philanthropy as well. And, of course, we know that the gold standard is that acknowledgement letters should be sent within a week of receipt of gifts. Let's talk about recognizing donors. Obviously, periodic recognition of donors, both as individuals and as groups, are very important to making them feel good, to make them realize that you're deeply appreciative of their generosity. And as Deborah said earlier, it gives an incentive to other people to give. So that can be done at events, for example, where the MC or the president can acknowledge the major donors in the room and just in a sentence or two tell the group how their generosity has had a huge impact on the institution and the patients or the art lovers, whatever it is. Vehicles for recognition, you got tons of them. You can put little stories on the website. You can do magazine articles. One thing that we have found successful, if you've got a really interesting person or a very interesting gift, is to go to your media and say, hey, I want to pitch this human interest story to you. Newspapers love to write about people giving away a lot of money, and that's a way that your donor can get recognition, not just by you, by his daily newspaper. Deborah, I think you had a couple examples of that, didn't you, on how institutions can recognize donors?
Well, one comes to mind. It's a hospital with a long and distinguished history. And in fact, it has really done great things about its history. It's built 2 museums. It's also built a recognition hall that focuses on the history and legacy of the entire hospital system. And it honors all of those who built it, especially the grateful patients. And the great thing is that the hall is in an extremely accessible location, so you can't miss it. Everybody goes through it all the time.
And another example kind of like that, there was an institution that was known for its football program. So they were smart. They knew that their donors liked football, and they would make sure that every single large donor was invited back for one of those games and, of course, events surrounding the games. And one of the big events was a huge brunch before the game held in a huge hall, and all the donors stayed in the hotel owned by the university, and there was a tunnel that connected the hotel to the banquet hall where the event was. So guess what this institution did in that tunnel? You can guess what they did. They put rosters up of the largest donors, photographs of the largest donors, and little articles about how the generosity of a particular donor impacted the institution. Another example, I mentioned magazine articles. I bet a lot of you are using your publications, whether it's an alumni magazine or a hospital magazine or an art magazine, to feature your prominent donors, maybe a nice photo of the couple and a story about their gift. I knew an institution that did this, but they took it a step further. After the article is published, everybody kind of forgets about it 6 months afterwards or a year later. But what this institution did, they made sure that the photographs were beautiful, they made sure the article was fantastic. But we would then match the article and the photograph attractively and frame it, and have the president present that to the couple maybe a year after it was published. And I know for a fact that a number of those benefactors still have those framed articles with the lovely photos from the alumni magazine up on their dining room wall. So again, use your own creativity to think about what would really turn on the people who mean the most to your institution. Reporting on impact use, Deborah made the distinction between use and impact. You want to let people know how the money was spent, but also the tremendous impact that it had on the institution or on the people that you serve. And you want to deliver creative and compelling information. But as you do this, you want to let each donor know what they might expect. You gave us a professorship, you're going to hear from the professor every year, but just make sure that you don't overcommit, because the worst thing you could do is to tell someone they're going to get a report and they don't get it. One other vehicle for giving visibility and also emphasizing the impact of gifts is with financial statements, which usually go out to your board and your major benefactors anyway. Why not go over to your CFO once a year and say, look, these are the 20 gifts that had the greatest impact on our institution. Sprinkle these in your annual report, because these benefactors are reading that annual report. And the last slide that I have before talking about staff responsibilities is to think about your stewardship program as you would think about a great concierge at a restaurant. For the very best donors, you want to think about special invitations to special events, maybe phone calls in advance of exciting things that are happening on campus, preferred seating, preferred parking, and access to visiting celebrities. Many of your organizations will bring in 1 or 2 celebrity speakers a year, and there could easily be a very small reception after the speech before the speaker goes to a larger reception, and your 3 or 4 big donors can meet Tony Blair or can meet whoever your institution brought in. That can be very, very powerful. Deborah, you had a couple examples, didn't you, about how we can provide some concierge treatment?
Well, I wanted to talk especially about hospitals, because often at the beginning of the development of a Grateful Patient program, sometimes hospitals find concierge services controversial. So in that case, it's important to distinguish between treatment and concierge service. Every patient gets the same excellent treatment, but important donors get special services to thank them for their gifts.
That's a great one. That is a great one. And another way of thinking of the concierge is to think about what a concierge does. A great concierge, he or she, will do 2 things. They'll try to anticipate your needs and wants, but they'll also say to you, hey, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. You can do that with your benefactors. And a great example of kind of anticipating what they might want or need, if you're a university, think about involving the donor whenever the donor's sons or daughters or grandchildren graduate from your institution. Those families, including the donors, can be invited to the president's special lunch where they get to meet the honorary degree holders. But I've even seen institutions invite the parents to put on a cap and gown and sit up on the stage so that when their grandson walks across the stage and shakes hands with the president, they can shake hands with grandma and grandpa. And you can just imagine the impact that that would have on those donors. Okay, let's talk just for a second about the responsibilities of staff. We alluded to this earlier, but you have to make sure that the staff members who have responsibility for these stewardship plans are given a menu of options to work with that have been approved at each level. And you want to charge that person with the responsibility of shaping that plan for each of the most important donors whenever that new commitment is secured. These plans are going to list specific stewardship activities. They're just like the master stewardship plan. It's going to have timetables and responsibilities. The major gift director who got the gift doesn't have to take all the steps, but it has to be clear who's responsible for what. And then finally, it is important that these individualized, these customized stewardship plans are monitored by somebody. And certainly if you have a director of donor stewardship or donor relations, that they're going to be monitoring them. But that's not enough. You also want the supervisor of the staff member responsible for getting the gift and shaping the individualized stewardship plan. You want that person to see the plan and to actually consider that as one of the performance standards to evaluate the major gift director.
Absolutely, Joe. Stewardship really should appear as a criterion in all gift officers' performance evaluations.
That's a great idea. So along with how many calls did you make, how much money did you raise, how many stewardship plans did you do, how solid were those plans, and how effective have you been in implementing them?
Thanks, Joe. I'd like to turn to best practices for a few minutes. This will be a quick summary of what we've talked about already, but I'd like to focus on those elements that are going to really formalize the plan. The first, of course, is institutional commitment, but it's not just commitment to stewardship, it's to a professionally organized and managed stewardship program. We have to have timely receipts and acknowledgments. We have to have scheduled reporting on use and impact and on financial reports for the project and the organization. Need to do both. It is critically important that you integrate fundraising, finance, and for educational institutions, financial aid data for accurate reporting. We've talked about the need for customized plans for your best donors, documentation, and an annual assessment. And one sign that shows that a program is successful is that it avoids overkill. Really important because donors are often turned off by overkill. The best stewardship programs are fully integrated into the cultivation cycle. So they're integrated into the process of approaching a donor, qualifying, cultivating, soliciting, everything. So they are simply a part of a whole cycle that moves the donor forward. And effective stewardship, as we've discussed, is institution-wide. So it involves the CEO, it involves key leaders, it involves everyone else, and it's seen as integral by everyone to the institution's viability. So it's about, again, developing a culture of philanthropy. Best practices give donors who are, oh, go ahead, Joe, please.
Yeah, I was just going to add, Deborah, I just thought of a great example of somebody who did, some institution that did something that you and I have both been talking about, and that is to make sure our stewardship activities not only look at who's given the biggest gift, but who has the potential to give the biggest gift. There was a university that had an alumnus who had enormous wealth. He was on everybody's radar screen really for decades and only made small gifts. Well, all of a sudden, in a campaign, he was inspired to make a $100,000 gift. Well, because this person had the potential to make an 8-figure gift, which he did 2 campaigns later, he got 8-figure stewardship for his $100,000 gift.
That's great. So a good stewardship program, being a good steward of a donor, shows that donor that your organization knows how to manage gifts and that you're going to use them for maximum impact. That's really important. We talked about the importance of a central system or database that can monitor and support stewardship activities. If you haven't put that into place, that's a top priority. And after you've got the plan and after everyone knows what the plan is, the stewardship staff really should have the authority to move forward, implement that plan, and not need to seek approval for specific steps. You've already got an agreement on that, and so just take it off the plate. And finally here, an individual stewardship plan takes into account the various interests, philanthropic interests that a donor might have at your organization. I want to spend just a couple of minutes on measuring the effectiveness of your stewardship program. Once again, institutions come in all shapes and sizes, so please design a program that's going to yield the best possible results for your organization. Not going to be the same across the board. It's good to think through strategic objectives. So Strategic objectives might be expanding the capacity of major donors for the next campaign, or cultivating donors to make blended gifts. So think that through with your colleagues. It's great to identify specific donor levels or donor groups whose expanded support is really important to your progress. And lastly, survey the various stewardship activities your organization could undertake in the future, but keep in mind your budgetary and personnel assets as well as your limits as you plan for the future. I want to thank you for your participation in today's call. We have a few minutes left for questions, and so we invite you to submit them. Questions, anyone? We'd love to respond. Thanks so much for your participation today. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to your participation in future GG&A webinars. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you all. You guys still there? Hello? Anybody there?